Hello, Internet, and welcome to my channel. I'm Chameleon X, and... Excuse me. Had a frog in my throat. Welcome to Creature Crossover, the show where we take a critter from a video game, TV, movies, or some other source and convert it for use in Dungeons & Dragons or other tabletop games. The first episode in this series covered Mirelurks, a creature from the Fallout franchise. However, the irradiated hellscape of post-apocalyptic America, aka the policy goals of the current administration, doesn't just contain a bunch of mutated shellfish and Lovecraftian frog people. Oh no. There are a huge wealth of interesting and horrific creatures in this setting, perhaps the most iconic of which is the subject of today's video. Ghouls, feral or otherwise, have been a mainstay of the Fallout series, appearing in basically every game in the franchise since the very first Fallout by Interplay in 1997, as well as on the Fallout TV show and in other media from the franchise like the official TTRPG by Modiphius Games. Recently, Fallout 76, the somewhat controversial MMO installment in the franchise, released a free update that not only expanded the in-game map for everyone, but also added in the long-awaited ability for the character to actually become a ghoul, something that has never before been possible in the game, despite how ubiquitous ghoul characters and even companions are throughout the franchise. So, how do we import our favorite cannibalistic burn victims into a tabletop game? Well, let's get into it. First of all, we have to understand what a ghoul is in the Fallout universe. In a nutshell, ghouls are heavily irradiated humans who have mutated into a perpetually rotting and effectively immortal mutant. They are traditionally characterized by a zombie-like appearance, with severe necrosis, missing hair, pieces falling off, and a sepulchral stench that surrounds them. Though in more recent games than the Fallout TV show, ghouls have become far less gruesome and viscerally disturbing to look at, and are now basically just human beef jerky. Probably for marketing purposes. From the very beginning of the series, ghouls have had a few consistent traits. They are not only immune to radiation, but are actually healed and sustained by it. Though they evidently still need water, ghouls seem to be able to survive without food for extended periods of time so long as they're exposed to radiation. With one notable exception, ghouls who transform as children are known to grow to adulthood like normal humans, and especially old ghouls seem to experience some of the symptoms of old age. But for the most part, they seem to be functionally immortal, with no known cases of a ghoul dying of old age, despite most of them being transformed over 200 years ago. The sole exception is the notorious fridge kid, Billy, who appears to be both physically and mentally a child, despite being apparently trapped in a fridge for over 200 years after being ghoulified during the war. Now, my personal opinion is that Billy has actually experienced extremely stunted growth, both physically and psychologically, making him appear to be a child despite actually being an adult. Honestly, the harder question is how the hell he didn't go feral after being trapped in a fridge alone for almost 200 years, but we'll talk about that a bit later. The exact reasons that cause some people to ghoulify and other people to just dieify are not very well understood. The only universal factor is exposure to high doses of radiation, but obviously this alone is not enough. One thing we do know is that genetics almost certainly plays a role in who becomes a ghoul and who becomes bloatfly food. We've seen multiple instances of parents, siblings, and even entire families becoming ghouls at the same time, so we know it can't just be random chance. We also know that certain chems, mutagenic compounds, and other arcane medical procedures can turn people into ghouls, but we don't know if this will work on everyone or if the subject needs to already have the right genetic makeup in the first place for the procedure to work. All we can really do is speculate. In any case, apart from immortality, rad absorption, and less need for sustenance, ghouls are also stated to be extremely resistant to disease and other toxins, which is odd for a creature covered in open wounds and exposed muscle, but okay. In return for this absurd level of survivability, however, ghouls suffer a number of rather severe drawbacks. The first and most obvious is their appearance. The vast majority of normal humans are instinctively repulsed by these creatures, and even if they don't shoot on sight, most smooth skins give ghouls a fairly wide berth. They are often barred from settlements entirely, or else confined to ghettos or the outskirts of a village. Their necrosis isn't just for show either. As mentioned above, it was fairly common, especially in the earlier games, for ghouls to be missing eyes, ears, noses, hair, and other soft tissue. The most dire danger for ghouls, however, and the main reason they are so feared and mistrusted by humans, comes from their potential to go feral. As the name suggests, feral ghouls suffer from a form of degenerative brain disease where they inevitably become violent, flesh-eating monsters that roam the wastes like mindless animals. Some traces of humanity do seem to remain, however, as feral ghouls naturally congregate in groups and hunt in packs, much like primeval humans. Feral ghouls also generally do not attack non-feral ghouls unless they are provoked, implying some ability to recognize their own kind, and in extremely rare cases, one can find feral ghouls who are non-violent even to humans. Like ghoulification in general, the exact causes of feralization are largely a mystery. Some speculate that all ghouls will eventually go feral, but there's currently no solid evidence for this. Some ghouls go feral almost immediately after ghoulification, while a great number of ghouls have survived since the Great War while showing no symptoms of feralization. Isolation, large or ongoing exposure to radiation, and the presence of prior mental illness in a subject seems to greatly increase the chances of going feral, while regular exercise, a positive outlook, and emotional support from peers seems to have a therapeutic effect. So basically just like any other neurodegenerative condition. Treatment for feralization is kind of controversial. In both the Fallout TV show and the recent update to Fallout 76, there are drugs which purport to stave off the effects of the disease and even temporarily reverse them. But there isn't enough evidence to see whether this is a placebo effect situation or if these drugs actually work. Or if they work, how exactly they function. In Fallout 76, it seems like all drugs stop you from going feral, which absolutely makes no sense. Like, the solution to losing your mind is apparently to constantly jack yourself up with enough painkillers, methamphetamines, and hallucinogenic substances to kill a bull elephant. Also in this game, ghoulification can be reversed, which goes totally against the rest of the established lore, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say this is some unique form of ghoul with their own bizarre mechanics that don't apply to the rest of the franchise, and just ignore the implications going forward. Cool? Cool. But anyway, now that we have a basic idea of what ghouls are and where they come from, let's talk about... First and foremost, the two different classes of ghoul, feral and non-feral, serve very different roles in a combat encounter. Lucid ghouls are basically just normal NPCs that look gross and smell really bad. Other than their resistances and special traits, there's not much that sets them apart from any other humanoid, at least mechanically. They can wear any armor and wield any weapon, their ability to strategize and cooperate with other creatures is going to be the same as regular humans, and there's of course the option to resolve encounters with role-playing instead of wanton violence. I provided a fair sample of different archetypes in the PDF: brute, artillery, soldier, skirmisher, even a Lovecraftian mind mage. All of these stat blocks can be modified to serve different purposes by swapping weapons or giving them different armor, again, like any other NPC. What makes them different is their mutant biology trait and rad absorption. To facilitate the latter trait, I've also included sidebars on how to treat radiation damage in each of the rule sets covered: D&D, Pathfinder, and DC-20. For 5e, I just tacked it onto the exhaustion system, which already pretty much does what it needed to do. For the other two systems, I created a disease-like progression where each stage of radiation poisoning provides stacking penalties, much like those in Fallout and New Vegas. Alternatively, for each of these systems, you can just use a simplified mechanic like in Fallout 4, where every 10 rads reduces your hit point maximum by 1%. 1,000 rads in any of these systems is instant death unless your party acts immediately to save you. Adding this subsystem is kind of important because all feral ghouls deal some amount of radiation damage with their melee attacks. Glowing ones, additionally, have the classic aura of radiation, as well as their radioactive pulse ability from the Bethesda-era games. Like in those games, a glowing one can serve the cleric role by using its radiation pulse to heal other ghouls in its vicinity, even raising unconscious ghouls to rejoin the fray. Until the players take them out, any other ghoul they drop is just going to get back up. As such, how hard or easy a fight is depends on where you place the glowing one in the encounter. Ideally, you want them to lurk in the back row, close enough for its aura to heal allied ghouls, but far enough that the PCs will have to push past the ghouls in the front in order to focus fire on it. Now, most glowing ones other than Reavers are not going to have a ranged attack. Also, being nearly mindless, they're not going to really operate strategically like that. If you want, you can have one of them feeding on a fallen enemy that just so happens to be in the right spot, and they just ignore the battle until they're done or approached. Otherwise, you can have the glowing one use hit-and-run tactics to charge the front row and then retreat to a safe distance. Perhaps there's a radiation source like a toxic waste barrel in the back that the ghoul can use to offset the damage it takes from provoking AOs. Either that, or perhaps a particularly intelligent glowing one could pick up an object in the environment, like a fire extinguisher, chair, or chunk of debris, and use it as a thrown projectile to attack at range. Its radiation burst can also be used to attack multiple enemies from a distance, but only deals damage in rads, so generally it's not going to actually kill the PCs unless they're right on the edge of 1,000. The glowing one is clever enough to know that this ability can res other ghouls, so if its turn comes up and it sees that it's exposed, with a bunch of its allies down, it probably isn't going to hesitate to wander into the middle of them and blast away, hoping to weaken their enemies and bring their meat shields back up. When it comes to other ghouls, most of them have a fairly similar MO. Almost all of them have pack tactics, and most have pounce, so the intended strategy is pretty clear. Charge in as a horde and tear everything you can reach to pieces. Essentially the running zombie from modern pop culture. The Feral Ghoul Reaver is unique in that it has a ranged attack. Like in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, it can rip off pieces of its own necrotic flesh to hurl at its enemies to damage them. A variant of the standard ghoul, the Feral Ghoul Stalker, is a bit more clever and hides among other corpses, pretending to be dead until prey comes near, at which point it jumps to its feet to attack. The Charred Feral Ghoul is a bulky brute with a ton of hit points and fire resistance, who instead of clawing enemies can grab them instead, holding them in place for allied ghouls to rip and tear. The Tumorous Feral Ghoul is a variant which I basically made up. This version is covered in gross pustules that burst and spray toxic waste when you strike the ghoul. And it also has high-speed regeneration that makes it even tougher to bring down, with or without the support of a glowing one. This last detail is a bit of a nod to the idea that ghouls can regenerate, which the TV show seems to have retconned into being a thing that ghouls do, despite that making basically zero sense given the whole rotting corpse that's literally falling apart thing. Personally, I just think Max was wrong, since he's the only one who used the word ghoul to describe what Thaddeus has become, and the show has already established that this wannabe knight is not exactly the brightest laser in the array, but that's a topic for its own video. Moving on. The Herald of Ugqualthoth is another one I made up myself. It's not, strictly speaking, a feral ghoul, but rather its striking intellect has been twisted to insanity by the influence of a mysterious, otherworldly entity with which it has been communing. This has allowed the creature to manifest a number of strange, almost supernatural powers, allowing it to act as a kind of magic user alongside other ghouls, whether feral or just indoctrinated into its deranged cult. As you can probably tell from the spell list, this guy is not an offensively oriented kind of beast. For the most part, it leaves the killing to its subordinates. It's much more suited to the kind of slow-boil, anxiety-filled Lovecraftian horror that inspired the entity that this monster is named for. Finally, the PDF includes a handful of stat blocks adapted for use in Pathfinder 2nd Edition and the 0.95 beta of DC-20, which, as of the writing of this script, was the most current version. The Pathfinder version is loosely based on some other zombie-like enemies in the bestiary, modified to add the ghoul's traits. The DC-20 ones were pretty tricky to work out, since the current version of the beta doesn't have any monster stat block examples, and the rules have changed somewhat significantly since the last time they released a previews of what monsters are going to look like. But as a financial backer of DC-20, I figured I'd put in the effort, so I used the few examples I could find that didn't require me to skim through hours-long podcasts, and put together a reasonable approximation of what a ghoul should look like in the current rule set. Since I haven't been able to playtest these rules in the first place, I have no idea how well the stat blocks I made will work, but, well, here they are. If you do end up using them, let me know how they work down in the comments. One last thing I wanted to mention is the feral ghoul from the official Fallout TTRPG by Modiphius. I did take a look at the stat block provided in the rulebook just to make sure there wasn't anything unusual about their version. Overall, it's pretty much the same as the ones I came up with for the other game systems I've talked about so far, other than just mechanical differences. Speaking of which, if you'd like me to make a video specifically about the Modiphius Fallout game, let me know down in the comments. When it comes to adding Fallout's ghouls to your campaign, the main challenge comes down to the setting. Ghouls occupy this unique position on the edge between science fiction and dark fantasy. On the surface, they're victims of atomic war that have been hideously mutated by nuclear radiation, but you don't have to look too deep to find the occult, supernatural horror that underpins their place within the franchise. They are, for all intents and purposes, undead in all but technicality. Doomed to walk the earth in a perpetual state of rot and decay, their inescapable fate to either die or go insane, to suffer a swift and violent end, or to slowly lose everything that makes them human. They're often tragic victims, innocent survivors cursed by happenstance or by the cruel machinations of others. In other cases, they're a result of Faustian bargains, those who cut deals with sinister powers for unnatural knowledge, gaining immortality at a gruesome cost. In a campaign that isn't specifically themed around the Fallout universe, the only thing that really needs to be tweaked is the nature of ghouls as radioactive mutants. In the Forgotten Realms, ghouls could be recast as plague-wrought humans twisted by the death of Mystra, immortal beings that aren't quite undead but aren't truly alive. Even after the goddess of magic was reincarnated, the ravaged survivors of the spell plague still remain, driven away from civilized lands and forced to wallow in ruins and forgotten wastes. In Eberron, ghouls could be survivors of the Mournland, warped by the dead grey mist that now shrouds the broken land of Sire. The Mourning is already a pretty obvious allegory for the detonation of a nuclear bomb, and the steampunk setting of Eberron lends itself pretty well to a Fallout-style adventure with guns, grenades, and advanced technology reflavored as magic. A team of scavengers venturing into the Mournland, searching the dilapidated ruins of once great Siren cities for anything valuable, could easily come across scores of pitiful survivors, twisted into horrific shapes by the unknown magic that has contaminated their former home. Alternatively, ghouls could have been condemned to their grotesque existence by Dalekeer experiments, or by planar incursions from Zoriat, the realm of madness. In a pure fantasy setting, you can evoke the same basic theme by replacing nuclear power with some form of taboo magic, like necromancy, shadow magic, dunamancy, or tapping power from some slumbering Lovecraftian god. The potential for growth and a near-limitless source of energy drives some to study and master this forbidden magic, whether for personal benefit or for the advancement of society. However, ghouls are warnings of what happens when the pursuit of knowledge is done recklessly or without regard for ethics. This forbidden magic, when handled by the inexperienced or careless, creates an insidious, unseen, corrupting field of influence that slowly leaks out, killing or mutating the life within its vicinity. In any case, one way to use ghouls in a campaign is to have a servant of some alien power start corrupting towns and villages with cursed artifacts that slowly kill most people while transforming others into rotting shamblers that resemble zombies. However, these creatures aren't truly undead, and some of them retain their minds and souls. The PCs must decide what to do about these pitiful creatures, many of whom are just normal people trapped in a hideous, necrotic form. They must discover the pattern of the villain's attacks, find a way to stop them while avoiding becoming contaminated themselves. Perhaps an NPC that is beloved by the party is ghoulified, and over the course of the campaign they can see obvious signs of cognitive decline, signaling that he or she is going feral. This can lend weight and urgency to the quest. Perhaps the PCs hope that defeating the BBUG will cure the affliction, or they might seek out ancient temples to dead gods, libraries of forbidden lore, or living guardians of lost knowledge to discover the secret to save their friend and lift the curse. Perhaps the BBG is in communion with a great old one who appears as a comet or rogue planet growing larger in the night sky, and the rise of ghouls is tied to its awakening. If the PCs can't stop the Herald from creating more ferals, they will reach a critical mass that will rouse the ageless abomination and prompt it to consume the world. Moving away from the eldritch horror angle, you could also just have ghouls be standard undead. They are, after all, basically the equivalent of running infected of the 28 temporal units later variety. Instead of aberrations, they could just be literal ghouls. Non-ferals can be a rare subtype that have overcome their desire for humanoid flesh and regained their humanity, but must live with the constant temptation to return to their cannibalistic ways. Kobold Press plays with this idea in their Midgard setting, if I'm not mistaken. In any case, as undead, you can have Fallout's ghouls be minions or victims of a necromancy-themed BBEG, such as a Lich, a Shadow Dragon, Orcus, Merkel, or whoever. Going back to the radiation theme, perhaps cultists or undead thralls of the villains have cursed objects they carry with them, which exude an aura of necromantic magic. They could be tasked to infiltrate nearby towns, cities, and villages, exposing as many people to this necromantic taint as possible. Perhaps some of the villagers notice the strange transformations spreading among their populace and seek out the PCs for help to cure the sickness. This vile magic works much like radiation sickness, weakening and eventually killing those who get too high of a dose. Except that those who die from the mystery illness then rise as ghouls, a rare few of which still retain their memories and personality. Well, that's it for this one. If you'd like to use the creatures discussed in this video, check the PDF linked below. If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. If there's a particular creature, franchise, or game system you want me to cover, leave it down in the comments. In the meantime, I have been Chameleon X, reminding you to always shoot him in the head.